Jim Winder, Salt Lake County Sheriff, thank you so much for being part of 3 Questions today.
Bob, it's my honor.
This has been a particularly difficult time for your department, the Unified Police Department. 3 officers dead in 18 days. You're just coming off of Doug Barney's death. How are you guys doing? How are you doing? How are the officers doing?
Well, first I want to say thank you. First for the recognition and combining all those elements is exactly, I think, appropriate. And the true answer is not well. Not well collectively as an agency, and not well, as an individual. One cannot, experience those kinds of issues, whether remotely or from really the intimate setting, and not be affected by them. I feel in the agency that there is a significant amount of sorrow. I think there is also combined in some instances with some guilt. Specifically, as I went up to one of the precincts in Holiday to deliver the terrible news that John had passed, and I think, as most people know, he had been involved with the Doug Barney shooting, and one of the officers that was there was also closely involved in Doug's situation, and I could just see on her face this I felt like I'd almost punched her. And I know that in that was not only the sorrow for John, but also kind of a little bit of survivor's remorse kind of a thing. The whole thing is very complicated, and I for those watching or listening, it's the same kind of thing that happens in a family when Aunt Jane dies, and then Uncle Bob, and then maybe someone else in the family dies in a close. That's how we all feel. So we're not exempt from that. It's a unique time. We're trying to figure out what it means,
How are you helping those officers and yourself, the people in the administration? Everybody is affected when officers either are killed in the line of duty or die. How does the department, how do you as the leader of the department try to answer those needs?
Yeah, so in the immediate, what we do is we find it very beneficial to get as many people together physically. For instance, when Brian Holdaway passed away, that happened physically in our investigations division at our headquarters building there. And because of the nature of it, many people were around it in real time. And so as we went to the hospital, we felt it appropriate, and it kind of happened just naturally, I think, to a certain extent. But a lot of people descended on the hospital, so we could be involved together in that grieving and that terrible reality. But by being together in that, there's also an element of reassurance and comfort, and even when Tina, Brian's wife, arrived there at the hospital, which was just terribly emotive. At least we were there. And I think it's where people wanted to be. So that's the first thing, is recognizing that proximity is important. The next thing is we offer peer support, which are lay colleagues that have training, but more importantly have been through traumatic incidents. And we try and assign or align individuals with these different experiences together to kind of talk about it. And then we bring in professionals. Employee assistance program, we have a contract employee assistance program, and I will be honest with you, they're very effective. That's kind of the first 24, 48 hours. And after that, there's some other things we do, but it kind of follows that trajectory. A lot of trying to keep us all talking.
Law enforcement as an occupation is tremendously emotionally draining. It is a very stressful job, both on the individual involved and their families. What is the key to emotional health through a career in law enforcement?
Well, that's a great question, and everybody deals with it a little differently. Some people deal with it through avoidance, compartmentalization, keeping that there and this here. I don't want my family to know about it, that kind of a thing. Other people very physically active and try and get it out that way. And other people, not so healthy approaches, which you can imagine, that's certainly not the right way to do it. I think that one of the best ways to do it is to, first of all, recognize these impacts. I think not exclude one's family, but also have strong external connections one has to get away from the job and the circle, and one has to have external church, community group, other group of friends, sports activity, a fraternal order of this, you know, and to get away from it. My wife is a firefighter, and honestly, I oftentimes like to spend time with her colleagues because it's a different crowd, different conversation, different, you know, it's not that I'm trying to avoid but I think you have to be able to separate. It's like, can you imagine spending all day with only reporters, you know?
I like them.
That's right, yeah, like fish that go bad after a few days. But no, but you get my point here. Because when you're with the reporters, I'll tell you what you'll be talking about is the job and the politics and the reporting and all this. Right. Yeah. So I think that's important.
There seems to be a greater appreciation, at least from the public, for what you do for a living and your colleagues, what you all do for a living. Is there any way that the public can really know what it is you guys go through?
I think that's a difficult question because it's kind of like asking, do I know what you know, a surgeon or a journalist goes through? The answer is no. I can't know exactly because you know, I'm not walking in your shoes. But I think what people need to recognize, I think, is that the downside of law enforcement is the media perception. A lot of people watch a lot of it on television. It's a common theme, and I think they oftentimes garner a lot of their opinions and perspectives based on that. And you know, it's not always accurate. You know, we're not all running around with guns out and in high-speed chases and doing all this kind of stuff. You know, much of it's pretty mundane. But I think people, for the most part, have a decent sense. One of the ways for them to understand it is we do these citizens academies. We hold a couple a year. Most police agencies do, not just Unified Police, but they're a great opportunity because what you can do is go through kind of a little mini academy, and it will put you in a position similar to what an officer goes through. That's a good perspective builder.
Yeah, shoot or don't shoot.
That's right.
That kind of thing. Yeah, nothing quiets critics quite as quickly as shoot or don't shoot.
You've been through it, I see.
Last year, you implemented a program to try to alleviate the overcrowding at the jail, Salt Lake County Jail. How is that program operating, and is it being successful?
It's a great question, and just to be perfectly clear, the program that I implemented was less about trying to alleviate overcrowding as it was alleviating what I think is a unfortunate and unnecessary cycle that has occurred. And our jail's been full for 20 years, Bob, since we built the thing, for a lot of reasons. And we need more jail space. There's just no question about it. It's costly. There's a lot of debate about it, or has been over the past 4 years. Do we do a jail or just do programs, this kind of thing? All of that has resulted in continued overcrowding. Here's what we have been happening. Officer arrests an individual, takes them down to the jail, we process them, and then we walk them out the back door. Now, that individual goes back out in the community very quickly, but the officer's perception and the community's perception is that somehow this was effective, when really what it was the height of ineffective and really masking what is a problem, right? If you're just taking people into the emergency room and just putting a Band-Aid on them each time and walking them out, they're still sick. Yeah. They're still a problem. And it gives everybody the false impression that the hospital is effective. Now, our jail is as effective as it can possibly be, but I wanted to stop that revolving door merry-go-round for a variety of reasons. One is it was crushing our staff because the volume of people that were coming through just to be processed is problematic. But the other issue is, I'll be honest with you, we as a community have to look this problem in the face. I cannot be the sole, not that, you know, I can't be ringing the bell by myself. People have to say, and it has caused this, why is the problem so acute right now? It's because we turned off the revolving door. So what people are seeing is the reality. What we were doing before was masking the reality.
So what is the answer then to the problem at the jail where there are far more people needing beds than there are beds?
It's complicated like many things and not. As a community, we have to recognize, first of all, that the problem we have requires resources. And then we have to decide that the resources are going to be more effective than doing nothing. And the resources we need are really three. Number one, we need early intervention, and that is to stop some of the contributors to crime, which are education, access to health care, employment, a variety of other things. Not really in my bailiwick, but you get it. The other thing is we have to have true treatment, where an individual with a substance abuse problem or with mental illness has the opportunity to go to a place to begin to lessen, and I have to be very clear on that, not cure. Cure, I don't know. Lessen the impact of their substance abuse problem or their mental illness and allow them to be functional. And we have to have more jail beds. The reason for that is when the person does fall off the wagon or has an episode or whatever, sometimes jail is the logical place for the entry, but it is not the place to keep, maintain, and the big myth is jail is the fixer. That when people go to jail, we cure. You see? That is false. Jail has a legitimate place to incapacitate, to stop the person from doing their destructive or problematic behaviors. But if people think the Salt Lake County Jail is where people go to get better, that is not accurate. So we need places for them to get better. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
And unfortunately, we live in a time right now where people, you talk about resources, you go out and ask somebody if they want taxes raised.
Yeah. No. Yeah, that's the answer.
And yet we all sit around and say, how'd this problem get so bad? Yeah.
There have been cases in the Salt Lake County Jail where inmates or prisoners have been sitting for a long time with mental illness, with no treatment and no trial. How do you solve that problem?
Well, like the other issue, as my father used to say, you solve a lot of problems with a greenback poultice. In other words, you take a big swack of money and you put it on top of it. Obviously facetious, but to solve that particular problem requires resources. What you're alluding to is a phenomenon called restoration of competency. And I'll give you an example. Let's say that you have been involved in a domestic. You have assaulted a family member. But the reason you've assaulted the family member is because you are destabilized from a mental illness. But you still got to be arrested, right? So you're arrested, you're transported to jail. You go in for your first appearance, and the judge recognizes you have a mental illness. So they say, go back to jail, and as soon as you're competent, as soon as you've been treated, you can continue past go and keep moving. The phenomenon you're describing is the individual goes into jail and there's nobody to get them better. So they linger in our jail because no one can even come and begin to get them competent. So we at the jail, once again, because of this mythology that the jail is the fixing place, we have people that will sit for 20, 30, 60, 90, 120 plus days. And no one has ever gone down to begin the restoration process. Those are not resources we have available. There is significant debate going on about that right now. The governor and the legislator have offered a solution, a pilot program, ironically, in Salt Lake County, where we will partner with the Utah State Hospital. We will take individuals that are there lingering. They will bring in significant mental health resources, and they will begin to fix them or restore their competency and get them out of jail as quick as possible. Because oftentimes when they've gone through that treatment, they'll go into court, they're deemed that their actions were a result of the mental illness, and they move into, that's right. Yeah. So they've actually gotten their criminal element resolved, because at the end of the day, their mens rea, their mental state was not, you can't convict a person of a crime if he does not have a mental state.
Body cameras, are they a good thing? Or are they a bad thing for police and law enforcement?
They're both. The problem with video is that we all think that video tells truth. Video provides a perspective. And just as you and I would see a particular thing, you would have a perspective and I would have a perspective. And even more so if you were standing over there, you would have a perspective different than I over here. The problem with body cams is when people see the snapshot of that particular lens, they perceive that as the only thing to believe or to rely upon, and that is never good. You never rely on one particular aspect or another, yet in our culture people believe if it's on video it must be the truth. So I think it's a very good tool, but like every other tool, it's not a magic wand. So we're going to have to evolve with the technology, and people are going to have to learn that, for instance, if the camera lens was more acute and showed something that the officer could not have seen with his naked eye, it is unfair to blame the officer for not seeing it.
Yes. The body cameras that UPD has now, do you feel like you're getting the best out of them in terms of using them as a law enforcement tool?
I think we're getting, as I just said, we're getting advantages and disadvantages with them. Look, we chose to implement them in a more thoughtful, that's rude to say. In a slower fashion, for this very reason. You know, we wanted to roll it out in a way that, first of all, we understood the financial implications. We had our members beta test the cameras. We looked at the best policies we possibly could. We tried to do it as efficiently as possible, and we got a grant, and we're sprinkling cameras throughout our department. I'm sure some people are saying, aha, so you should have given to everybody. Well, does a detective really need to have one all the time versus a canine versus another individual? So what we're doing is we're putting them out there, but I'm telling you what we're going to have is some very positives and some negatives. I'll give you an example. We're going to have a situation where an officer, due to technological difficulties, is involved in an incident, and we have to tell the public there was no video, the camera wasn't operational. And you know what people will say?
He turned it off.
So we're damned by nothing more than this. That's right. Conversely, we're going to have another one where it was turned on, and people can see very clearly that the individual rushed our officer with an object or something like that, and there you go. So again, it's this black and white issue. You know, it's not that easy.
In light of the number of terror attacks that have happened both internationally and domestically, is your department doing anything differently now than it did, say, 10 years ago because of that terrorist threat?
Yes. There are several kind of best practice training curriculums that we have implemented. One in particular, it's referred to as MAC-TAC, and I don't want to go into it too specifically because there are some tactical implications, but the essence of it, Bob, is this, that what we have learned is never put all your eggs in one basket. In other words, if you have a situation that occurs at Skyline High, which we just recently had here, an active shooter situation, turned out to be a hoax, but you don't take the whole kit and caboodle and move them over there. What you do is you meter the resources in anticipation that someone is using that for other purposes and those kinds of things. Now, that's a basic description of it, but yes, I think we are evolving. We're getting better at it. Does there need to be more training and more interagency coordination? Absolutely, but yeah, we're progressing.
Naloxone has proven to be just a miracle drug out on the street, but recently the price for it has just jumped like 600%. What is your response to that? And at that rate, are you able to outfit each one of your officers with naloxone at that kind of increased price?
Well, before I freak out, I want to say that I, like you, am learning about this. As the time of this filming, we are kind of getting bits and pieces of this. So the issue from my standpoint is, will there still be a public safety reduction and a variety of other questions. But to answer your question directly, right now we have it in all of our patrol cars, and we have a decent supply. When that supply runs out, and by the way, it has a shelf life, I think, of about 18 months, 12, 18 months. So the point is, it's fairly short-lived. You know, after a while, we're going to have to throw a bunch of it away. When we go out to order again, if it is, as they have prescribed, or they've indicated, $400 or $600 a bottle, of course we're not going to be carrying as much. And if that does happen, I hope that we as a society, and specifically our legislators, respond to this even more aggressive than we did with the EpiPen situation. Because the EpiPen was the tip of the iceberg. If now companies are going to say that not only do we have protections for copyright or for trademark, but then at any moment, once the government and the society has become so dependent upon it that we can just turn it up. You know who else does that? Is the drug trafficking organizations in heroin and cocaine. They're no better than street drug dealers, Bob. And I think to some extent we may have to review them in that light.
You've had a long and distinguished law enforcement career.
I'm old.
I was being more polite. What are you going to do? After you're done being sheriff, have you thought about politics?
No, I haven't. I've been flattered from time to time. People have mentioned that. Look, what I want to do is I want to be a good dad. I want to be a good husband. I want to be healthy. I want to enjoy the life that unfortunately some of my colleagues and friends are not here to enjoy.
What does that mean? What are you going to be when you grow up?
Fisherman. I'm going to read the books that are sitting on my nightstand. I'm going to engage in community efforts. There are a number of charities that I really enjoy. I hope to be able to be involved in those organizations still, if they'll still have me. And so, live life. But politics, especially now, I find it a bit of a blood sport, and I don't like the polarization. I love community service, but politics, they're two different animals.
Jim Winder, Salt Lake County Sheriff, thank you so much for being part of 3 Questions.
Thank you, Bob.